Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Wine's World, and as is becoming customary, I am not going to cook today, mainly because my cooking has become remarkably pedestrian in the last few weeks, and this is in part because of the lack of different ingredients that I used to be able to get with ease when I lived closer to the palace. Now that I live more in an industrial area, the fruits and vegetables and meats and so forth are not very interesting. So if I make a new journey to parts unknown, I might get back into cooking again. But meanwhile, what I'd like to talk about today is the passage of time. And I have two specific subjects that I want to deal with. Whether I get to both or not is another matter, but I want to talk about how calendars are formed and what they're for, and secondly, wasting time. And let's just start the ball rolling. Well, having a calendar has many different values. One of them is religious, that with a calendar you can time significant rituals. In the Christian tradition, this would be Easter and Christmas primarily. In the Jewish tradition, this would be Rosh Hashanah, Passover. In the Islamic tradition, certainly Ramadan. But there's also the question of when to start planting your crops and so forth, that are to some extent dependent on the cycle of the year. Now you could say, well, you plant your crops when the weather is right. And that would kind of be okay, but you have to have a ballpark, you have to have a metric that you're working on. And different cultures have different calendars for different reasons. The one that we use now, the Gregorian calendar, really comes out of the ancient world, a descendant of the Julian calendar, which was actually put in place by Julius Caesar. Now, thinking about Julius Caesar, I then want to ask, well, where does your year start? And of course now the year starts on January 1st, but that was by no means true throughout history. The various dates have been used as the first day of the year. But the second part of that same question is, when was the first year of your calendar? And for Julius Caesar, they used the abbreviation AUC, which meant ab urbe condita, from the founding of the city being Rome, and they had a date that they had set. So the Roman calendar used the legendary founding of the city. The Gregorian calendar hypothetically uses the birth of Jesus, but when they were making the calendar initially, they went off by a few years. It is now reckoned that Jesus was probably born in the year 4, what was called 4 BC, before Christ. So he was born 4 years before he was born. But you set a date and you say, okay, that's our founding date. In some ways, some calendars, the Jewish calendar, for example, is hypothetically linked to the creation story and so forth. Now, what's interesting to a historian is that these numerical systems are not uniform at all. And when I was doing a lot of historical work that involved finding dates of events in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries in England, a lot of the time they didn't use the numerical system that we use. They used regnal years. That is, you ask somebody, what year is it? They would say, it's the 3rd year of the reign of Henry VIII, or the 2nd year of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. You know, they wouldn't call her Queen Elizabeth I because they only had one, but Queen Elizabeth. Yeah. So that I used to have to use a book giving all of the starting dates of all of the kings and queens of England, and their year started on that date. So, you know, if a particular king was crowned king, well, that's also not true. It's not when they were crowned, it was when they got the throne. That the day that they became king, let's say it was 26th of March, their first year began on the 26th of March. And so that if somebody says something like, in June of the 12th year of this king, you have to do a lot of calculations to figure out what year it is, because it just says the 12th year. It doesn't tell you anything more than that. And if you have a timetable, then you can translate that local year into a more global year. Now, having years calculated in that way is okay if all of your commerce and business activities are within one nation. Then it doesn't really matter whether the year is 1458 or 1459, because all you need to know is what year of the reigning king it is. But when you start a lot of complicated international affairs, then you're going to be writing receipts, you're going to be making contracts, particularly when something is due, a payment, for example, or a delivery. And then you need to have a baseline metric that both you and your foreign partners agree upon. So you can't say to them, I will deliver these goods in the 6th year of King Edward IV. Because they won't know what that is if they, you know, they're maybe in France or in Portugal or some German state. So that you have to have a metric that you can all agree upon. And the metric we all agree upon most of the time now is the Gregorian calendar, but you'll easily understand that that's a bias towards what Europe wants. You know, that it's not the calendar of Buddhism or Judaism or China, which used to have a Taoist religion, but I can't really say Taoism, so you know, like the Chinese calendar, or the Cambodia has a different calendar from all the rest, because you can count time in many different ways, but the two that were very commonly used were lunar months, creating a lunar calendar, and the solar year. And the Gregorian calendar is, of course, solar. It works on the assumption that a year represents the revolution of the Earth once around the sun, back to the same point. And if you use phases of the moon, you're going to get out of synchronicity with the solar year, because there aren't an exact number of phases of the moon in a solar year. Now, I would actually, I think, be happy with recording months as lunar months. That way we'd have regularity. Every month would be 28 days. And we wouldn't have to worry about, you know, whether the month has 30 or 31 days. They'd all have 28 days. But then you'd have to have what we call an intercalary month somewhere, because you don't have exactly 12 moons in the year, so you'd have to have an extra month. And it would change whether it's at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, would be dependent on the particular phases of the moon. But the first of the month would be the first crescent appearance of the new moon, and you would go 28 days until the next month. But I think that would be kind of cool. And if you do that, you create what's called a lunisolar calendar, and there are some cultures that do use something like that. It allows them to still keep something approximating the Gregorian calendar, but localized months, which leads me to a much broader topic, which is how our metrics in general map onto things that we understand. The metric system has what are essentially arbitrary units, but there was a time when the units of measurement, of length, of capacity, and so forth, were more human. You know, there was a concept of a span, which was the span of a hand, or a cubit, which in some cultures was the distance from the elbow to the fingers or the knuckles. An inch is this part of the thumb. People used to measure yards by taking, let's say, material, and they'd stretch it out to an arm's length. So it was a yard, roughly a length of an arm, and so forth. Now, we can't really do that and have accurate commerce, obviously. If I want for example, 3 yards of fabric to make a suit or a dress, I need to have a standard metric of a yard so that I can go to somebody selling fabric and ask for that number of yards, and they will produce it. I can't go and hope for the best that their distance between nose and fingertips is enough to measure out the material that I need. Oh, this is all obvious. Just as having the year being designated by the regnal year of the king is not useful on a global scale. All understood. We have to move to what are arbitrary or arbitrarily chosen units, as in the case of what year is it. You have to, in a sense, it may not seem it, but you arbitrarily say this is the first year of the calendar. I mean, even if you have a good story as to why you think it's the first year. Well, when we lose track of the motion of the sun and the motion of the moon, or our measurements from our own bodies, we're becoming alienated from our measuring system. The arbitrariness of it makes it, in a literal sense, inhuman. And in the case of calendars, because we're no longer measuring it by things that we can observe, like the moons, we actually have to have a calendar. We have to look and see, oh, okay, it's now the 4th of August, or whatever date you happen to have. You are trading your personal experience with something external to you. You're giving authority, in this case literally authority over time, to somebody else. Well, as a retiree, I can say that I don't do that. I mean, look, I don't wear a watch. I do usually know what day of the week it is well enough to be able to figure out when I have to do these videos so that I can post them on Tuesdays and Fridays. Sure, I have a calendar on my computer if I need it, and I have a clock on the computer. So I've got something that I can use as my measuring system if I want to. But one of the great freedoms I feel, because I don't have a job and because I don't have any temporal obligations to anybody else, is I feel a certain amount of freedom. Freedom from the calendar, freedom from the clock. And there's no advice to give, except to just suggest that even people who are 9-to-5ers, Monday to Friday and so on, you can still, to a degree, liberate yourself from the calendar. And I will explain that more in a future video, probably Friday, when I'm also going to talk about using your time wisely and wasting time. And wasting time is always something that I've found just inexplicable, especially the notion of killing time. I mean, it just sounds like a brutal metaphor to begin with, like I'm going to kill time. But people kill time because they're waiting for something. they're going to go out in a couple of hours to a party, and they don't have to get dressed for a while, don't know what to do, and so they're going to kill time. Well, it's not a concept that I have any remote understanding of, because I've always got something to do. I never have to waste time, and I don't like wasting time. So I'll talk about that next time, and meanwhile tell your friends about this video, like and subscribe, and in a certain amount of time I will be back with you. Bye.